Alright, chat. It's time. The time for crime. Mad Orchard released a new video today, and we gonna watch it. And I'm gonna play Rogue Tower, because I can.
Hey buddy, if you like watching Marcus, how about throwing in some of that internet money? Patreon friends get early access.
God. Mad Orchard is really cringe, and that's kind of absolutely endearing.
Access to feature videos and occasional bonuses. But for now, take a load off and enjoy the video, guys.
God.
If you consume films or TV shows about criminal cases, you will be familiar with the term reasonable doubt.
But what he didn't lose, and what none of us can lose, were his constitutional rights to an attorney,
Hey,
to a
I'm
fair
gobbing my
and
ghoul
impartial
over
trial
here.
by you, his peers, and to the presumption of his innocence beyond a reasonable doubt.
Aside from being a core tenet of the criminal justice system in the US and many other countries across the world, another reason screenwriters
That's
may
work,
often choose to
Archangel.
hone in on the
I'm not doing
concept
work.
when penning a gripping closing address is that it does
Well,
not require
I am doing work, technically, right now. But I don't have the brain for work.
any sort of prestigious degree to understand.
empty, too
So
gay.
simple is it that its definition is contained within the term itself. As a juror deciding the fate of a person who stands accused of a serious criminal offence, you should not vote to convict unless you are convinced of that person's guilt beyond a doubt that is reasonable. The burden of said convincing falls upon the prosecution. It is not enough for them to prove that it is likely the accused is guilty, or even that it is very likely. Their task is to establish that their evidence in support of the charges in question is so robust that a reasonable person simply applying basic common sense to what's been put in front of them could not do anything but settle on a conviction. When thinking about reasonable doubt in those terms, it's easy to start to wonder how enough convictions are secured to justify the number of prison cells we seem to need. But of course the reasonable in reasonable doubt cuts both ways. Just as a prosecutor who is blessed with a case that looks pretty bad for the defendant on its face can't skate by without dotting their I's and crossing their T's, a defense attorney with a few inconsistent witness statements and a potentially
I love Better Call Saul. I need to go finish that show.
exculpatory circumstance or two up their sleeve cannot count on winning an acquittal. Just as the standard of reasonable doubt is not met by a prosecutor demonstrating the accused is very likely to be guilty, it is also not enough for a defense attorney to demonstrate it is possible they are innocent. They need to present an argument for that possibility that is plausible enough that a reasonable person in good company could relay such an argument while keeping a straight face. A fair and just system in theory, and so too, in this video's opinion, for the most part, in practice. Trial outcomes that are widely viewed as an absolute travesty have a way of occupying headlines and feeding a perception that the justice system is broken, because outrageous exceptions are more captivating than the palatable rule. If you were to sample a dozen trials at random, however, our bet is that you would find the majority of the time the outcome was correct, or at least understandable. Juries are selected carefully, and they tend to take their instructions seriously. In addition to that, most cases are simply much more clear-cut than what winds up in headlines or movies and television shows. Reasonable doubt can sound like a rather finicky standard, but usually the question of whether or not it's there is actually quite an easy one to answer once both sides have given it all they have. But every now and again, a case comes along that really straddles the
Center
line.
Spiral, thank you for subscribing.
The case we'll be presenting
I've been worried that my content is lacking lately, so I appreciate your confidence and your Bezos bucks.
today to strain the limits of your credulity takes place in the small Canadian town of St. John, New Brunswick. and begins on July 7th, 2011, with a woman named Maureen Adamson arriving at the offices of investment firm Far End Corporation, where she worked as a secretary for Richard Oland. Beyond being president and CEO of the firm,
Damn, he looks like a guy who wouldn't do anything bad.
Richard Oland was somewhat of a pillar of the community. The Oland family are known as the owners of Canada's oldest independent brewery, Moosehead, though Richard had long since carved out a career separate from the family business, amassing his own fortune of about $37 million through a variety of ventures, and gaining recognition in St. John for
Definitely
dedicating
a bad
time and resources toward vitalizing the city. As Adamson made her way toward the office, morning coffees in hand, she had no reason to anticipate anything other than a normal day. But it did not take long for her to notice that something seemed to be amiss. The first oddity that came to her attention was that the door to the building was unlocked, though she was reliably the first to arrive on site every morning. When she arrived at the second story where Far End's offices were located, she was hit by a rancid stench unlike anything she had ever experienced, though the foul odor's source of origin did not immediately become apparent. Next, she noticed the office's air conditioner was running at full blast. It would be very unlike Richard Oland to neglect turning off such an appliance before finishing up work the previous evening. And then Maureen Adamson spotted the thing that made her realize in an instant that things were not just off, but terribly and gravely wrong. Two legs protruding from the bottom of Richard Oland's desk, surrounded by a pool of blood. A responding officer would later say that Oland's murder was one of the bloodiest he had ever seen in his career.
Yo, that's a lot of blood. That's a lot of blood. That takes a lot of blood for like a police officer to say that. You know? Because it's a police officer.
He had been viciously bludgeoned to death, with a total of 45 blunt and sharp force wounds across his hands, neck, and head. Oland's horrific murder defied any easy explanation. Despite his contributions to the community, he wasn't exactly known to be the most agreeable man on Earth, and had his fair share of enemies.
Oh, you don't say. You mean this smug motherfucker wasn't well liked? I'm shocked. Good evening, my ass is dragon. You're just in time for the new Mad Orchard video. We're very excited.
But not this kind of enemy, as far as anyone knew. Though a clear motive for anyone was lacking, one thing the authorities did have were the simple logistical facts of the evening prior to Oland's body being discovered. Maureen Adamson had clocked out before her boss at about 5:45, and at that time there were only two other people in the office. Richard Oland and his 43-year-old son Dennis, who he was having a meeting
Goddamn Dennis!
with concerning a genealogy project they had been working on due to a shared interest in Oland family lineage. This made Dennis the last known person to have seen his father alive, and at the site of the murder no less. So it will come as no surprise that Dennis was immediately the prime suspect, and he was interviewed at around 6 PM on the 7th, though he was told at that point that he was being treated as a witness.
You can just have a seat right there. Ready? Yeah. Alrighty.
Yeah. Wait, so you get called in, and you're the last person known to see your dad alive, and they're like, oh no, you're just a witness. Chat, what day is it? What day is it, chat? Did you do your homework? Do you know what day it is? Do you know what day it is? Sunday? Talk to Cops Tuesday? Wrong. It's Friday. That's right, bookworm as fuck. Shut the fuck up Friday. Every day is Shut the Fuck Up Friday.
Been a long day, huh? Oh, yeah.
Never talk to the
All right. I know we met before, but I'm Constable Davidson. Okay. And what we're gonna do is I'm gonna have you, if you want to, just write out on this paper.
Write out.
You know, basically,
Write out.
when you got up yesterday to when you went to sleep last night,
Okay.
and all the important details of the day
Okay.
that you want to write down. Okay.
Oh, sure.
I'm gonna go set up in the next room.
Okay.
And then I'll be back to talk to you.
Okay.
Dennis Oland does as instructed and writes down a supposedly as detailed account as he can of his movements over the course of July 6th, handing his soon-to-be interrogators a very significant weapon. Anything he says from this point forward that differs from or is not included in this written account can be characterized as a change in his story indicative of deception. Constable Stephen Davidson also takes Dennis's phone from him under the pretext of not wanting them to be distracted. Oland's defense will later cite this as a form of psychological detention. By taking the phone, they argue Davidson is putting Oland under the impression that he is in some form of police custody at this moment and needs to comply with their orders, where in fact he is under no obligation to hand over his phone or even stay in the room, as he is not officially being treated as a suspect. Another thing to quickly note that we'll be putting more of an emphasis on as the interview commences is that Dennis Oland and the rest of his family have not actually been told exactly what happened to Richard yet. The police have merely disclosed that he has died and that foul play is suspected. Dennis did not take the opportunity before being left in the room to write out his account to ask for a scintilla of additional detail about how his father was murdered, something you would expect
curious.
to be at the forefront of just about anyone's mind at this moment.
If you have anything on your mind right now about you know, the events, certainly just go ahead and we'll talk here.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing that's on my mind is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So now it cannot be said that Dennis has not asked for more information, though Davidson has essentially prompted the question, as virtually no one would respond differently to the query of, is there anything on your mind about the day's events in this situation? But now that Dennis has asked, Davidson will not actually provide any additional details about the circumstances of Richard's passing. We're going to put a timer on the screen that denotes how long Dennis goes without following up on this point. Discussing or speculating on the matter does not count. What we're looking for here is a demand or even polite request for more information.
You know, this seems to be something that's not... Well, it's pretty clear in my head that he didn't have a heart attack and die. Something's happened to him.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so the first thing that runs through your head is, you know, is this one of those, you know, crackhead type things or whatever, where someone goes in and, you know, does that kind of thing, or, you know, like sort of being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
One thing we can be just about certain of is that this was not one of those crackhead type things. Authorities ruled out an opportunistic robbery scenario very early, as there were no signs of forced entry on any of the doors or windows to the office. And more significantly, Richard Oland's wallet, Rolex watch, keys to his BMW, and all known valuables present in his office were left untouched. With one exception, his iPhone was missing. A very significant exception, no doubt, but circumstances around Richard's iPhone will actually help put more suspicion on Dennis in ways that we'll explain a little bit later.
Mm-hmm. That sort of thing, or you know, some sort of, or maybe it is natural and it's a drug reaction, but it just doesn't, you know, some sort of drug intake reaction, but it just, I don't know, just doesn't smell like that's what's going on. So
Right.
your mind's just racing. It's like, this just seems really it's just troubling, I guess. So, I mean, as far as anything I have to offer, you know, I mean, he's a healthy guy.
Dennis continues to...
I mean, he's kind of stuttering. I'm kind of inclined to believe him, actually, at this point. Also, he's being real dumb about this, if he is actually the killer.
emphasized that Richard was healthy, and also states that he cannot think of anyone in his life that would want to kill him, even though it's true he was not the easiest man to get along with. On that last point, Constable Davidson probes Dennis on his relationship with his father. This will become a topic of significant contention within his interrogation, as well as the case as a whole. Dennis Oland's supporters maintain he is completely forthright in his characterization of his relationship with his father, while authorities believe he is downplaying the level of acrimony between them.
He and I didn't have that close father-son relationship. I think we would do well just by... He had this thing that you can't be friends with your son.
Right.
And I get that. He wasn't friends with his father. I don't think I wanted to be friends with him. But...
God.
So, and he would say and do things that
he was
could be
real
hurtful.
asshole.
But if you didn't see a lot of each other, and particularly in the last few years because he's been racing, I hardly see him at all.
Right.
For me, I guess the time that I've seen him is when we've been doing this family history stuff, and that's why I was over there yesterday.
Yeah.
We're in business together too. Well, not together. He's a client of mine.
Okay.
I'm his stockbroker, one of his stockbrokers, and have been for ever since I've been back here, so over 15 years.
Right.
And I manage a part of his investment portfolio. So we talk on the phone when he's home quite often, or email conversations, text conversations, that kind of thing.
Yeah. The common link between the two of you, I guess. At this point, through your communications, is business or sailing, something like that?
Yeah, well, we don't sail together. It's funny. We tried, and we just, we did this when I was a teenager, and it went okay. Yeah. But he's just a real hard guy to be on a boat with, so we just stopped.
That should work, huh?
Well, it's just, he just barks and barks and barks,
okay.
And, so we just stopped. It was just, it wasn't good for our relationship, so we just didn't do it.
Okay.
And we just agreed to disagree. I mean, look, the biggest thing my father did for me, and it was a surprise, a very pleasant surprise, when I went through a divorce 3 or 4 years ago now, maybe 4 years ago, and it was a very bitter experience.
Yes.
And an experience where I was very likely going to lose my home. And this is a home that it's an old family home. It was owned by my grandparents, been in the family for 70 years.
Very important.
And there's a farm behind it. And he stepped up and said, look, that's not going to happen. And he basically bankrolled my whole divorce case, which ended up being $85,000. It was a very lengthy divorce.
Yes.
And then because I had to basically give half of my asset.
This guy's been just giving his entire life fucking story to this man. Holy shit.
That's to my ex-wife. He bankrolled that as well, so that I could keep my house.
Right.
So basically I have a mortgage with him, which is an interest-only mortgage. So, I pay $1,600 a month versus I was paying before like $2,500 a month because I had to give up so much money.
Yes.
I had to give him my farm, which was about $125,000, to him in exchange for some of this, but that was fine because, the farm hasn't changed. Jacqueline, my sister, runs the farm, everything's... So you can imagine, when you have this somewhat difficult relationship with your father, when the going gets tough, he stepped up.
Right.
And I mean, that's very powerful stuff.
It showed you that even though your relationship may have been strained on the outside, you're just still a father deep down.
Exactly. And that was fantastic.
This is a key area where authorities believe Dennis is deliberately sugarcoating the dynamic between him and Richard. First of all, he is downplaying the extent of his debts to a degree investigators are not even aware of yet. In addition to owing $500,000 to his father, he had maxed out a $163,000 line of credit on his house.
Jeez. Chat, I have no idea. This is what I would use. I'll use a term from the Chapa Trap House. This man's the ultimate fail son. Dude hates his dad. He can't achieve anything on his own, and somehow has become indebted to his you know, 37 millionaire dad for almost $700,000. Like, jeez.
A $27,000 limit on his credit card and had a $75,000 debt.
Oh, sorry. I was lowballing it. I stopped him. I didn't realize it would go much higher.
The investment firm he worked for, in addition to having recently received a $16,000 advance on his pay. Dennis was also bound to monthly child support payments of $1,667. The monthly income he was receiving to chip away at all of this was averaging about $6,000. So put simply, we're looking at a man in severe
this is actually a low score. He was aiming for higher.
Financial straits, who's surely dealing with the chronic emotional turmoil that comes along with it. Dennis Oland characterizes his father's willingness to float him the $500,000 on his house and to become his debtor as a kindness, and that certainly is a way one could look at it. Given investigators' suspicions of Dennis, however, they have a hunch this is not his genuine outlook on the situation. They think Richard, a man who had enough money to wipe all of his son's financial woes with a few strokes of a pen, while barely feeling a sting, instead choosing to merely throw him a lifeline in the form of a giant loan, fostered a deep resentment in Dennis, especially as his financial situation worsened and he struggled to make his monthly payments on the...
We don't know yet, Austin W. Travis. We're putting on our Peepo Analyze caps today.
$500K. The thinking goes that on the evening of July 6th, Dennis may have asked his father to loan him yet more money for some of his more recent debts, and when his father refused, or perhaps even berated him for his irresponsible spending habits, that, coupled with all of his pent-up stress, caused him to snap, fly into a rage, and bludgeon his father to death.
As one does.
A loan of $500,000 or $600,000. That's a lot.
It was a small loan to start my business of a mere $500,000 to $600,000.
A lot of money. Mm-hmm. And I was grateful for it.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
As anybody would be.
As anybody would. It's a lot of money.
Yeah. Going back over the last few years, was there anything in your mind that would stick out as being unusual or different? Did your father ever bring anything up while talking that concerned you, maybe, or?
He personally, no. I mean, there is. I'm sure you've heard this already from the others. I mean, there is this family concern that he's had an affair, mm-hmm. was having an affair, or what have you. And my sister Lisa is sort of the one who's followed this whole thing for the last 2 or 3 years, and I think at first you turn a blind eye to it, and then I guess it's one of those things is if you don't see it happening and you're not aware it happens, you don't really know what to do.
Mm. Richard Oland was having an affair at the time of his murder with a woman named Diana Sedlacek. Dennis discusses what little he claims to know about her and other relationships his father had, both personal and professional, and then transitions to his business dealings with Richard.
My business relationship's a bit different with him than other clients because I am generally the advisor with mm-hmm. most of my clients. In the case with him, I'm more of an order taker. He sort of managed his own thing because he had retired from the trucking business and mm-hmm. retired from a lot of his volunteer work, and he decided he was going to run an investment management company, basically. Right. And I would be one of his advisors and mm-hmm. things like that. Was it a perfect relationship? No. I mean, if something went wrong, he would fly off, or if the phone wasn't picked up on the third ring, he's quite meticulous, yeah. right? So you'd hear about it.
Mm-hmm. Later, investigators will...
I'm getting to the point where this man, he's being a sussy little baka.
Incorporate what Dennis just said about Richard flying off if someone did not pick up the phone after 3 rings into his interrogation, as well as what he is about to say about the great Christmas pudding debacle.
What the fuck? Oh, man.
I'm trying to think of the last time we had a big fight. I mean, I certainly remember a Christmas dinner, not last year, it might have been 2 years ago, where he blew a gasket of something simple. When you you have a Christmas cake and you pour rum over, hot rum
Yes.
over it, and you let it flame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, it was my job to do that, and it flamed for like 30 seconds and flamed out.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I got it from the kitchen into the dining room, it flamed out. Well, it was a big fight over that.
Okay.
Yeah, it was, you know, it's not physical, but I mean, it was ugly. I might have left. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, everybody was very upset.
Davidson has still not read
fuck?
Oland his rights at this point, on the basis that he is just taking a statement. Word to the wise: if you're ever being interviewed about a person who has just been murdered, and you're asked about the last time you ever had a big fight with that person, you're definitely a suspect.
Yup.
Dennis continues to talk about general family dynamics for a time.
Because what day is it, chat? What day is it? Say it with me. Shut the fuck up, Friday.
After which, Constable Davidson transitions to the crucial topic of July 6th.
I want to now just focus on of course, the last 24 hours and everything that had happened. I know a lot of things had happened, and I just want to go through, I guess, what happened yesterday and run through the day for me.
Sure, yeah. I mean, until I went over to his office, it was a very typical day. You get up in the morning, he would have called the office. I think I wrote down, I know I was just going to head out for lunch and I was already late, and the phone rang. We have our special phone for him, because if someone's going to pick it up, don't he gets mad. And so I got the phone and we did this trade.
After several minutes of what could be described as babbling about his day and the genealogy project he was working on with Richard, Dennis comes to the point where he needs to break down what happened from the time he arrived at the Far End Corporation office.
I can get into, do you want me to get into real specific detail, or?
Yeah, just whatever.
Yeah. As much detail as possible, please. Just keep it coming. Keep it coming. I'm eating it right up.
I mean, it sort of paraphrases what I wrote down. I mean, I went over there. I'm thinking, I know I got there once, and I realized I forgot some stuff at the office. So I got back in my car to go back to the office, and then
What time did you get there the first time?
around 5:30, but before, it would have been 4 or 5:30, because I think the second time it was, I was there probably, Maureen left after I got there.
The first time?
No, the second time.
Okay.
So I didn't go in the office the first time. I went to the top of the stairs, and I might have used the bathroom, and then I left, and then came back. I went to go back to my office, but I don't have a key, and it was too late to go back in. So obviously it was after 5,
Right.
because everything gets shut down.
At your office?
Yeah,
5.
Yeah, they I don't know what time they lock the elevator, but you need one of those, same thing you guys have around here, those little pass card things. Yeah, so I went back and just said, oh, well, I have enough information. I have what he wanted. And went in. Maureen was there. She was obviously getting ready to leave. And we just... I got the logbook that my father had got from my uncle. It's this old family logbook from a camp. So I got that from Maureen, and because Dad had it for a year, and my uncle's down from Toronto and he wanted it back. He was supposed to get it copied a long time ago.
This is a great example of how seemingly mundane details can sometimes wind up being potentially very significant. You've just heard Dennis talk about retrieving an old camp logbook from Maureen Adamson to return to his uncle. Keep note of that. Dennis describes the time spent with his father while they were alone in the office after Maureen Adamson left for the day. According to him, they basically just worked on the genealogy project.
Yeah, that was it. Then I left and got in the car, and Lisa called me, actually. Where the hell are you?
As it will turn out, though, Dennis actually made a third trip back to the office.
And Trema, did you just clip me doing the... Because there was important context to that you should have included in the clip. How dare you? How dare you?
One he will never disclose in this interview, as he claims he only remembered it in the days that followed. Security cameras captured his car driving back toward the Far End office.
There was not context? There was not context in the clip. Yeah, you didn't include the context that I was talking about a police officer. Yeah, okay,
At 6:21 p.m. Dennis will claim that as he was driving home, he realized that he had forgotten the logbook that he was supposed to return to his uncle, and so he circled back. When he returned to the office and retrieved the logbook, Richard Oland was still alive and well by his account. He received the call from his wife Lisa at 6:36 p.m. when he returned to his car after that third trip. So it's curious that his remembering that phone call has not triggered a memory of returning to the office, especially because he says she was calling specifically to ask him what was taking him so long to get home.
And I was going to go, I hurt my knee sailing last weekend, so I was going to go to the drugstore and get some painkillers. I ended up doing it today. Tylenol has a muscle thing. I thought I'd try that. And went home.
He's shaking a little bit in his voice.
On the way home, I stopped at the Renforth Wharf to see if my kids were there, because they do kayaking there. And they swim after, but they weren't there. So
investigators found Dennis making a stop at Renforth Wharf on his way home, allegedly.
It's called Renforth Wharf? God damn, say that 5 times fast.
To check if his kids just happened to be swimming there, very suspicious from the outset, and they won't be shy about that when they move into direct confrontation. But however bad you might think the wharf stop looks right now, it's going to look a whole lot worse when the investigation really kicks into gear.
Hey,
You'll
Mithril
recall
Mist.
the only valuable of note missing from Richard Oland's office was his iPhone. At 6:44 p.m., which would be about the time Dennis was at
I hope you had a
Renforth
good
Wharf,
D&D session.
Richard Oland's mistress attempted to contact him via text. That text message was transmitted to Richard's iPhone by a cell tower in Rothsay, which strongly suggests his phone was in and around the Renforth Wharf area, as his mobile
I really dislike the name of this area.
provider had 3 towers closer to his office. It was the last communication his phone ever received. Technically, it would be possible for the cell tower in Rothsay to transmit the text, even if Richard's iPhone was still near his office due to circumstances like network congestion in the area. But such an occurrence would be very rare, and before entertaining such an explanation, you should ask yourself,
Entrama, what the fuck?
how bad can Dennis Oland's luck reasonably be?
What was the last thing that would have been said between
Don't have my
you
Discord?
and your father?
Entrama, take care of that. Get Mad Lad in the Discord.
the last specific
Cool place for cool people.
conversation would have been specifically on that Halifax Olands and their ruining of their wealth and doing these things. As far as the final words, like, okay, great, goodbye, I mean, I don't...
Yeah, Thrillby, you can
It
go
might have
too.
been me saying, yeah, gotta go, time for me to go, okay, great, whatever.
Didn't say, I'll see you tomorrow, I'll see you. Do you remember anything like that?
No,
He wouldn't say that.
Much later down the line, when Dennis gets around to remembering he took a third trip back to the office to retrieve the logbook, he will say that Richard wanted to look through it with him before he left. But just like the phone call from his wife, his being prompted to recall the very last interaction he had with his father is not rekindling any memory of his return trip.
Des, I have to ask you this. Did you have any involvement in your father's death?
no.
It was the
I
69th
ask you that
episode of your
because you're the
campaign and
last
no one
person
made a
there.
joke
Yeah.
of that?
And
That's awesome.
it's something that I have to cover.
Yeah.
It must be a good campaign.
I have no reason to want my father dead, to kill him, to...
With the standard caveat that not everyone can be expected to have the same reaction to a question as heavy as the one that has just been put on Dennis Oland, it's worth noting that the object...
Wait, is this still the same day? I don't know that this is the same day. If so, he's being remarkably calm that his dad just died.
he offers is a very cold and logical one. Not that he would never do such a thing as wicked as murdering his father, but simply that he had no reason to.
I mean, no. I mean, we've had our things, but no, I wouldn't rob
Our
someone
things.
of the fun that they're having, and, he's just, no.
Can you think of who would have an interest in that? Who would benefit from that the most?
because of a grudge or revenge.
For any reason, do you see
Revenge.
who would benefit the most from your father's death?
How many Assassin's Guilds has he been in
Someone
contact
who
with?
wanted $20 out of a wallet to buy drugs. This is reaching a vindictive ex-girlfriend, but I don't know that woman, so I don't know. But no, I think he's pissed a lot of people off, but not to that point where someone would want to kill somebody.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any other reason why someone would do this? Any other reason why? The type of person that would do it?
Someone who's pretty sick, I guess. Someone who, if someone has killed him, which you're implying that that's
One
the case.
sick puppy.
I can't. There's no one who has lost money by him.
Just some absolute sicko, or I'm just spitballing here. Maybe the guy who killed him is just like really cool and handsome. Maybe he's just like the coolest guy and handsome, and like maybe like you'd want to like kiss him or something, like on the mouth. I'm not saying, but I mean, we might be sending you a thing. I'm so lost. I'm just it's fine.
There's no one who he has
I
as
was
far
doing
as I
a
know,
riff.
insulted in any way. There's no one that
Okay, I'll take a look at it later, Mad Lab.
has left out. I'm sure there were some of his
Joke failure.
old sailor buddies that were upset that they weren't included in the new sort of boat and what was going on there. But that's
Fatality.
stuff that everybody in life has to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis continues to struggle to think of any obvious suspect.
Thanks,
Constable
Purple
Davidson
Menace.
excuses himself for a time, under the pretext that he needs to check on any new information that might have come in. In reality, he is conferring with 3 other investigators who are monitoring the interview from another room. When he gets back, Davidson gets Dennis to again walk him through his movements in the evening leading up to the murder. The aspect he and his colleagues are especially interested in pressing Dennis on is his trip back to his office after initially arriving at Richard's. The one he says was for the purpose of picking up some documents that he forgot, but that he abandoned part way, deciding it was more trouble than it was worth. The whole thing strikes them as unnatural and awkward. Their working theory is that Dennis may have got cold feet at the door to Richard's office and chickened out on a murder plan, but talked himself around to it again as he began driving away and went back. Realizing his movements have likely been caught on camera, Dennis has concocted the forgotten document story to get ahead of his seemingly odd behavior.
Okay, so you go to the door
Yeah.
and
Went up the stairs and had my bag of stuff, and I forgot my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, some of my stuff. So I left and went to go back to the office, and then don't need that stuff. So I went back.
you back to the office.
I went to go back to my office,
Okay.
and then gave up. I might have likely would have gone down Princess Street and up King and back in Canterbury.
You drove?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You drove back to your
Yeah.
office.
Yeah.
The fact that Dennis got back into his car is a detail that makes his claim of intending to return to his office less plausible still. Here's a map of the route from Richard's office to Dennis's, approximately 3 minutes on foot, which might even be quicker than driving when factoring in the time to find a parking spot.
Why did you take your car back around instead of walking?
Because I wasn't sure I was going to be going back.
Ooh, he getting defensive. He's in the huddle posture.
Okay.
I was just probably going to leave,
Okay.
and then said, no, I got what I wanted here.
What Dennis Oland just said doesn't seem to be entirely coherent, and it would have been good to hear what he'd have to say if Davidson pressed him for further clarification on this point. So he got back in his car because he forgot some stuff at his office, but he wasn't necessarily going to drive back to his
What a
office to
Weasley little
retrieve
liar,
that stuff. Rather just drop his plans for the genealogy project with his father entirely and go home. But then very shortly after he's begun the commute, he thinks better of it, decides he never needed those other documents in the first place, and heads back. People go through messy, indecisive thought processes sometimes, so none of this is impossible. But again, it all just sounds very unnatural, the way concocted stories often do. Regardless of whether or not his claim that he was probably just going to leave is a lie, it's certainly a change in story, as he's stated multiple times, including mere moments ago, that returning to his office was absolutely his intent. The qualifications of his intent are also suspect in and of themselves. All of this happened 24 hours ago, so one would think that Dennis Oland would be able to remember clearly whether his plan was to return to his office or go home.
What were you wearing? Because I just want to make sure who's coming in, who's going out when we look at the surveillance.
Yeah, you might have been asking for it. I don't know.
That's Dennis. And that's
these pants, the shoes, a dress shirt, and a navy blazer.
Dennis Oland was in fact wearing a brown sports jacket on the evening of July 6th, and it will turn out he seems to have a very good reason to misremember that particular detail. When investigators review the security footage and note the brown sports jacket, they will include it on a list of items to be seized in the search warrant they execute on Oland's house. Unfortunately, it had been taken to the dry cleaners, apparently by Dennis's wife Lisa, the very morning after this interview. However, testing will still reveal 4 minute bloodstains on the jacket that will match Richard Oland's DNA profile.
Shocking.
At this point, you might be looking at the title of this video and thinking something along the lines of, "You can't possibly be serious." So just a quick disclosure that there are some complicating factors around the blood evidence and other parts of the case against Dennis Oland that we will
blood evidence, often more colloquially known as blevidence,
unpack later, but we want to address all of the information that comes up in the interview before going into too much of the wider case. So hang tight.
Somebody has done something to my father. You've told me that. And, I mean, but that's all you'll tell me. You won't tell me anything else. And, you know, what happened to him?
It took him an hour and a half to ask what happened to his dad. Holy shit. Holy shit. Yo. Yo. What the fuck?
What did they do to him?
Are you asking me that question?
Yes.
Well, again, all I know is that the death did occur. I don't know much more than that because I haven't been there. I've been up here. So for the details, I don't know, and I would share them with you. I would certainly share them with you. But I guess what I'm trying to do is try to get as much information as I can to point us in the right direction. Our other guys do the other stuff.
Yes, I understand. I understand. They said we weren't going to learn a whole lot today.
Constable Davidson continues pushing Dennis on whether there is any information he is withholding, and after letting him go to the bathroom, tries to specifically focus on the details of his decision to drive away from Richard's office before circling back. There is an especially prolonged discussion about the specific route he took as he began his commute, with Davidson taking a particular interest in a newly disclosed detail from Dennis, that he might have briefly gone the wrong way up a one-way street for the purpose of beelining into an adjacent parking lot. Davidson stresses he finds it an odd detail to have omitted earlier, while Dennis maintains he doesn't understand why it would be significant. None of all of this really goes anywhere. The overarching theme is Davidson makes it increasingly apparent he believes Dennis is hiding something, and Dennis remains firm that he is not. After conferring with his colleagues, Davidson decides it is time to read Dennis Oland his rights, marking an official transition from interview to interrogation.
Dennis, there's been some inconsistencies in your story, okay? And I just want you to pay attention to me. I'm going to read some things to you, okay? Right now. And this is right to counsel. And it says, before you say anything, it's my duty to inform you that you have the right to retain...
Before you say anything, 2.5 hours into a conversation.
and instruct legal counsel without delay. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do.
What do you want to do about your right to contact a lawyer right now?
Given how uncomfortable I'm feeling, yes, I would, sure.
Okay.
To exercise my right.
You have nothing to hope from any promise of favor of me promising you anything.
No, yeah.
And nothing to fear from any threat,
Yeah.
whether you say anything or not.
Yeah.
And anything you say may be given in evidence. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Can I get you to just sign there that you do understand that?
I hear.
Yeah.
After going through his rights, Dennis Oland has a brief phone call with a friend and lawyer named Bill Teed. Then it's back to the interrogation.
Bill
Rights
Teed
of
what?
Canadians are very similar to Americans when it comes to speaking with police. But there are some differences in very key areas, and this is one of them. Whereas in the US, once you invoke your right to an attorney, the interrogation must stop. In Canada, the police just have to let you speak to an attorney. After that, they can still ask you whatever they like.
Dennis, given our conversation, there's no doubt in my mind that you did this.
Constable Davidson will later state under oath that at this point, he wasn't actually 100% certain that Dennis Oland was responsible for his father's murder. This is an interrogation technique called positive
No, they don't have that option in the United States. They just often don't care.
confrontation, where the interrogator will directly confront the subject with the proposition of their guilt, and while doing so, sometimes exaggerate their own level of confidence in the matter to discourage denial.
Did what?
You had involvement in this death, and I want to know why. Okay, I want to find out the reasons why.
Okay, you just told me in a piece of paper that I should be talking to a lawyer.
Yes.
And,
Yes, you should be.
shouldn't say anything, do anything unless I talk to a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've done that, and now you're at me.
I'm just asking you. Okay, we're having a conversation here.
Okay, but I think that
This is a real back and
the
forth
conversation
type
probably should
situation.
end because
Okay.
I don't like it.
Okay.
And I think that from what I read on there, that I shouldn't be saying anything if I
Okay.
don't like what's going on.
We said before that the rights of Canadians are very similar to those of Americans for the most part in this area, and this exchange illustrates how that's so. Dennis Oland is right. He shouldn't be saying anything, at all. As Davidson advised when he ran Oland through his rights, Oland has, quote, nothing to hope from any promise of favour and nothing to fear from any threat whether or not he says anything. Anything he says may be used as evidence. It sounds very similar to what Americans know as the Miranda warning, and its meaning is basically identical. Cooperation with police will not lead them to drop their suspicions out of some sense of gratitude. And because Oland has a right to remain silent under Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, any prosecutor will be forbidden from drawing attention to his decision to invoke that right as an indicator of guilt. If Oland chooses to say something that they think casts him in a negative light, however, they will in all
What
likelihood
did
be
this guy
allowed to
do?
draw
He
all
might have murdered
kinds of
his dad.
inferences from it.
Right, but it's your opportunity for us to talk, okay? And to find out reasons why.
Because of your tone and what you just said, I choose not to take advantage of that opportunity.
Okay, but this is an opportunity for you to talk to me about why that offends you. Why?
Okay, but you
Why
do
do you
have
You
that
just accused
opportunity.
me of being the cause of death of my father. So don't like that at all.
Okay. Did you?
No.
Did you do it?
No.
Okay.
But look, can we you just said to me, Dennis, I think you need a lawyer, so
There's an opportunity to speak to a lawyer. At that point, you did speak to a lawyer.
This is so... honestly, this is real fucked up. This is real fucked up. I hate this. I hate an agent of the state being able to confine you in a room. Just being like, yeah, well, I'm still gonna keep talking to you.
And now I want to have the conversation with you, okay?
The circular conversation of, I don't want to say anything without a lawyer. You've already spoken to a lawyer. He said not to say anything, but I'd still like you to speak with me, will continue round and round for quite some time, and at one point, Bill Teed actually calls the station back, and Dennis is able to speak to him again. Constable Davidson is in a tricky spot, because while he's able to encourage Dennis to speak as much as he likes, he can never actually say anything that implies he will receive favourable treatment if he does, or negative treatment if he does not, as this would violate his rights. This makes the articulation of any reason to speak that actually makes sense difficult to impossible. And so Davidson's pitch always boils down to something like, "You should talk because I think that would be a good idea." Davidson begins pushing Richard's disagreeable nature as part of a motive to murder.
Listen, I understand the relationship you and your father had wasn't a good one. He was very strained. He was hard on you. You never amounted to what he wanted. That bothered you. I'm sure that resentment carried through your whole life.
See, this man, he's never been a Twitch streamer, alright? Us Twitch streamers, we sit here, we look at chat, people say shit all the damn time, okay? We're strong. We're Doge strong, okay? Like the buff Doge emote.
Even to now.
I never said that.
We'd never crack under interrogation.
You said you guys had a strained relationship. It wasn't a regular father-son relationship. There was always that where you had to be, to a certain level he held you to. If you did something wrong, look at the cake. My God,
The goddamn cake coming back again. Chekhov's rum cake.
You went to light some rum on fire, it went out in 30 seconds or less, and he gets mad at you.
Using the Christmas pudding anecdote that Dennis shared earlier to support his theory of motive illustrates why a lawyer will always advise you to stay silent. Just as the warning states, anything you say may be used as evidence, and that doesn't just mean in the future courtroom. Next, Davidson utilizes minimization by emphasizing that he does not think the murder was premeditated.
Hey Quincy,
right?
how you doing?
Saying that, it's spontaneous and you're not cold and methodical. Please share that with me. We've been sitting here together and, you get a feel for a person. And that's a feeling I have. Am I right?
So far, Davidson has been taking a textbook read technique approach, but none of it goes anywhere. So he's called out, and next up to bat is Keith Copeland of the Major Crime Unit, Steve Davidson's partner.
True,
Keith Copeland,
Quincy.
the Major Crime Unit. Steve Davidson's partner.
Oh god, the resolution on this camera is so low that I thought he was wearing a bike helmet.
I've been watching this interview since it started. I've been involved in this investigation right from the get-go. It's very clear to me that you, Dennis, are in a very bad place. You're in way over your head and a lot of confusion in your mind as to what's happening, how it got this far. So let me explain to you how it got this far, because it's been very interesting for me to be able to sit back and watch all of this that's going on. People communicate verbally like I am with you here now, but people also communicate non-verbally. Do you know what I mean by that, Dennis? Body language. Sometimes when people communicate, they communicate verbally, they lie. Sometimes when people are lying, they don't remember their lies, and they trip up and they stumble. Because, you know what, people who are good, honest people who don't make a habit of lying find it difficult to maintain a story and remember what they said before because it was a lie. You don't remember lies. Good, honest people don't remember lies because it's a lie. Why would you remember it? You don't want to say it in the first place. An honest person remembers their story clearly from start to finish because it's honest, it's true, it's cohesive, it's the way it happened.
Copeland's assertion that honest people do not misremember details is not true, of course, and in all likelihood he doesn't actually believe that. His bad cop approach of asserting that they have Oland pegged through a combination of body language and statement analysis continues for several minutes, and Copeland also uses details Dennis offered during the interview phase to further cement the idea of a deep festering rage toward his father.
I can only imagine. I mean, here's a guy. I'm so powerful, You put a phone in your office, and when I call you, you answer that phone within 3 rings. That's how powerful I am. Man, when I heard you say that, I said, whoa, what an asshole. That's insane. What an ego.
But Dennis Oland remains steadfast and barely says anything at all, except to reiterate his belief that he should not say anything unless it's through his lawyer. Similar to Davidson, Copeland's attempts to articulate a reason he should not follow his lawyer's advice without offering reward or threatening punishment are almost comically feeble.
The person who I called said, just, don't talk anymore. Mm-hmm. And I'm going, that's what my heart tells me, my head tells me to respect that is the right thing to do.
Why does it seem like the right thing to do?
It's following advice.
Have you always followed the advice that you've been given? Always, every single time?
From experts, I tend to feel that it's good to trust them, yeah.
Well, all of the executives at Enron were experts, weren't they?
Yeah, I don't think these guys we're not talking about that.
No, we're not. We are absolutely not. And I'm glad you recognize that, Dennis. Dennis, is Lisa in on this? Is your wife in on this? Is this part of the plan? Are you being controlled by your wife about this? You have to know that we will look at every single possibility. If you have nothing further to say, if you are not in a position to say, what you think, what you know, what your heart tells you to do,
just blink.
We will look at everything.
Copeland is coming dangerously close to crossing a red line here. Under Canada's confessions rule, he is forbidden.
He talked with the police for 2.5 hours before he finally requested a lawyer. And also, this is Canada, so even after you request a lawyer, they can still talk to you.
From implying that a threat will be carried out.
So he's trying to invoke, the Canadian equivalent of, the Fifth Amendment, but they're still interrogating him, so.
Oland does not cooperate. If he were to make a confession at this moment, a defense lawyer might argue that he only did so because Copeland insinuated that if he did not implicate himself and himself alone, then the police might go after his wife as some sort of accomplice in a murder plot. We're not saying this defense would necessarily be successful. A counter-argument would be that Copeland is just stating facts. If the culprit does not come forward to police and make it clear how everything happened, then the police need to do their own investigation and leave no stone unturned. But if Copeland hasn't violated Oland's charter rights at this moment, he's brought himself about as close as he can to doing so without quite crossing that line. But there will be no need for such a legal test, as Oland continues to say barely anything, as Copeland prods him to no avail whatsoever.
But you want the evidence to show that you sat in a chair and closed your eyes, and for all intents and purposes appear to be sleeping while I'm trying to talk to you about this? Is that what the image you want to project? No remorse, and guess what, copper, I'm going to have a snooze.
Copeland's appeals continue to fall on deaf ears as he tries to take every angle he can think of. At one point, sharing a story about a crackhead he arrested after a high-speed chase in a stolen car. Initially, the crackhead too did not want to speak on the basis that he did not think Copeland would believe his story. But after being reassured by Copeland that he had an open mind, he told him he did not actually steal the car, and the reason he fled police was he had a parole warrant out for him. Another crackhead had given him the keys to the car he was driving to go score them some more crack, and called it in stolen when he took too long to get back to the crack den, as he had decided to stop by Sears to do some shoplifting on the way home. Ultimately, his story checked out, and he was charged for shoplifting, fleeing police, and presumably violating his parole, but not for stealing the car. All thanks to his willingness to speak with Keith Copeland.
You look at any other kind of scenario, any other kind of situation where a person has made a mistake, there's 2 ways to clean up that mistake. One is to acknowledge it and to move on with it, and the other one is to deny it. Oh, no. Nope. That's all I can say. Nope.
If I made a mistake, I could acknowledge it through a lawyer. If I didn't make a mistake, I could acknowledge it through a lawyer.
we have no response. But that was perfect.
From there it's 15 minutes and change of more of the same until Copeland finally relents and lets Dennis Oland go.
This is your
Oh,
opportunity. Dennis.
finally. God.
Will you take advantage of that opportunity? Will you tell me what happened? It's a yes or no.
No.
We're done. Right this way.
At least he shut the fuck up after he got read his rights.
One thing police neglected to do after nearly 5 hours of questioning was have Oland submit his shoes and pants into evidence, despite the fact that he stated on record they were the same as he was wearing on the evening of the blood-soaked murder. Assuming Dennis Oland is the culprit, that may have been one of the oversights that prevented police from building a sound enough case to arrest him until November 12, 2013, well over 2 years after the murder, and due to a multitude of other complicating factors, not least of which was putting together a jury which could be reasonably called impartial in a city where the Oland family was so prominent. The murder trial did not commence until almost 2 years after that, on September 16th, 2015. From what we've been over in Oland's interrogation, it may seem like the Crown have a devastating case. Though while the argument for Dennis Oland's guilt is certainly no joke, his defence team unearthed enough to make things interesting. The first thing to look at when trying to find a road away from Dennis is the time of Richard Oland's death. We know Dennis was the last known person to see Richard alive, but we don't know if Richard died before the final time Dennis is documented as travelling away from his office at approximately 6:36 p.m. So do we have any indications the murder may have taken place after that time? Yes. When police were taking witness statements, they spoke to a man named John Ainsworth, who was working in his printing business on the ground floor below Richard's office on the night of the murder. He and a friend named Anthony Shaw, who was in the print shop with him, both recalled hearing loud, thumping noises that night, loud enough to make them stop what they were doing for a time and look up before writing it off as unimportant and continuing with their work after the thumping stopped. Later, Ainsworth, Shaw and the police were all confident that what they heard was the bludgeoning of Richard Oland. In his initial statement to police, Ainsworth placed the incident between roughly 7:30 and 8:11 p.m. when a customer came into the shop. Shaw estimated it was between 7:30 and 7:45. If those timing estimates are even close to right, and if the thumping they heard was indeed the murder, then Dennis Oland is categorically excluded from being the culprit, as a security camera captured him shopping at Cochrane's County Market at 7:38 p.m. Cochrane's is a good 15-minute drive from Richard Oland's office. But alas, by the time the trial rolled around, things got a little more complicated. Shaw remained adamant in his estimate of between 7:30 and 7:45, but Ainsworth had a much wider window. Now he said he and Shaw could have heard the sounds anywhere from 6 p.m. to when the customer came in a bit past 8. The defence alleged that in the time between that evening and the trial, Ainsworth had become prejudiced against Oland and had changed his account to help the Crown's case. Ainsworth was adamant his initial statement was only an on-the-spot guesstimate, and there was never a time he could have been 100% certain he had not heard the sounds before 7 or even 6:30. So for now let's just split the difference and say that the accounts of Ainsworth and Shaw offer some chance that Dennis Oland has an alibi. How do we reconcile his innocence with some of the evidence we've covered that seems to scream guilt? The big two the defence had to contend with were the blood-stained jacket and the cell tower. Saving the, for lack of a better term, best for last, we'll start with the cell tower. The first thing to take into account is that Richard's phone pinging off the tower, most likely to correspond with Rentforth Wharf, doesn't mean his phone was at Rentforth Wharf. It just means it was likely in and around the general area that tower normally services, in which Rentforth Wharf is just one of many locations.
Matt Orchard is doing this on purpose. He's saying it so many times on purpose. I know it. I know
The cell
it.
tower evidence can be presented in a way that paints a picture of Dennis and the killer being in the same location, which seems like a fanciful coincidence. But when you consider it could also mean Dennis being at the wharf while the killer is fleeing the crime scene, driving along a route which puts them in range of the Rothsay Tower, when Richard Oland's mistress sends his phone a text, it's still a very unfortunate coincidence to be sure, but perhaps not one that is quite in the realm of fantasy. It's also worth noting that the obvious insinuation with Dennis Oland taking the phone to the wharf is that he disposed of it there. The iPhone has never been recovered despite thorough searches of the area, including in the water. As for the blood on the jacket, Oland's defense pointed out that no blood was visible on the jacket, or any of his clothes or body in any of the security footage from that evening. So while one could look at the dry cleaning and infer it was part of a cover-up, we're not looking at a suspect who was drenched in blood to begin with, which intuitively you would expect one to be if they carried out a murder as brutally violent as the one that created the scene in Richard Oland's office. There were also no bloody footprints in the office, no blood detected in Dennis Oland's car, no blood anywhere on anything he owned, barring the few minute spots on the brown sports jacket. And the defense argued, even after dry cleaning, if Dennis Oland was guilty, there should be a lot more blood detectable on that jacket. The obvious counter to that is that if he isn't guilty, there shouldn't be any. To deal with that, the defense put forward the following explanation for how Richard Oland's blood could have innocuously wound up on the jacket, that they contended was much more consistent with the volume of blood found than spatter from a bludgeoning. Richard Oland habitually chewed his cuticles, sometimes drawing blood, and additionally would sometimes scratch and pick at scabs on his head, also making him liable to wind up with crusty blood on the tips of his fingers. Dennis, as well as several other witnesses, testified that Richard was touchy when it came to social interactions.
Yo, you mean the guy who made bloody scabs on his head was touchy in social situations? No shit.
Sort of man who would grasp your shoulder when giving you a handshake, so it could have been something like that caused tiny specks of blood to be transferred to Dennis's jacket. Dennis also stored some of his clothes, including the jacket, in Richard's closet for a time while his house was being renovated. On occasion, Richard would confuse some of Dennis's clothes for his own, providing another potential opportunity for transfer. These are just a sampling of some of the arguments and evidence presented over the course of Dennis Oland's marathon 65-day trial. His defense team scrutinized every piece of the Crown's evidence from just about every angle one could think of. And finally, after about 30 hours of deliberations stretched over the course of 4 days,
the jury signaled that they had reached a verdict, and then, of course, Dennis Oland was recalled to the courthouse. He entered in with his family and was sitting there as the foreman read out that verdict, guilty. At that point, there was absolute shock in the courtroom, and Dennis Oland doubled over and began to sob uncontrollably. Many of his friends and family also did the same. A lot of tears, a lot of disbelief in that courtroom.
And so again you might be looking at the title of this video, and this time thinking something along the lines of, hey, what gives? Well, the story isn't over yet. Oland's legal team continued to make appeals, and on October 24th of 2016, one of them was successful. The New Brunswick Court of Appeal overturned Oland's conviction on the basis that the judge had not instructed jurors properly concerning Oland's incorrect statement to police that he was wearing a navy blazer rather than a brown jacket. The judge told the jurors the issue for them to decide was whether the appellant's inaccurate description of the jacket was an honest mistake or an intentional lie that was related to the commission of the offence charged. The Court of Appeal's decision stated that the judge should also have instructed the jurors that even if they found the appellant's erroneous statement was a lie, it had no probative value unless they also found, on the basis of other evidence, that it was fabricated in order to conceal his involvement in the murder of his father. These sorts of decisions can make one wonder exactly how much common sense jurors should be expected to have without instruction, but whatever. After that decision, another legal battle was whether Dennis Oland's retrial would be put to another jury or a judge alone, with the defence pushing for the latter. What their contention essentially boiled down to was that the prospect of finding an unprejudiced jury in a city where the Oland family and the case were so prominent was bleak, and they feared that no matter how much effort went into vetting them, whatever jury they ultimately assembled would not properly take on board the instruction that they could only convict if they found Oland's guilt to be beyond a reasonable doubt. They lost that fight, until they won it.
Oland's new trial was scheduled to begin today, but the case has been derailed yet again. The judge says a St. John police officer engaged in improper investigations into the backgrounds of prospective jurors that irreparably tainted the jury selection process. He discharged the 16 jurors. Tonight, the police board announced it will ask for a review into the officer's conduct. Oland's lawyer says this latest mishap can be added to the list of problems with police actions in the case.
The defense contended at the first trial that Dennis Oland was charged because of the mistakes, the confusion, even the bungling actions of the St. John police force, who too quickly focused on him and failed to find and follow the clues to the real killer or killers.
Dennis Oland will now be tried by judge alone. He has maintained his innocence from the very beginning, and his family has stood by him every step of the way.
So after a lengthy trial that resulted in a conviction that was subsequently quashed, and a second trial that was ruled a mistrial only a week into proceedings, finally the task of deciding Dennis Oland's fate was put into the lone hands of Justice Terence Morrison. His finding?
In court, the judge said there is much to implicate Dennis Oland in the murder of his father. The Crown argued money was the motive, producing evidence of Oland's soaring debts. But the judge wasn't satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense argued the police had tunnel vision.
We all sincerely hope, and the Oland family sincerely hopes, that the St. John police force will finally reinvigorate the investigation and start doing the investigation that should have been done 8 years ago to find the real perpetrators of this terrible, terrible crime.
The defense also emphasized this remains a family tragedy.
I'm a little uncomfortable with people coming up and saying congratulations as if this was some day to celebrate, because it's important to bear in mind that Dennis lost his dad to a brutal murder.
And opinion is still divided now that Oland has been declared not guilty.
It doesn't surprise me in the least.
Money buys freedom.
I'm kind of surprised.
I feel very much for Dennis Oland. I think he's been through a tremendous amount.
The divide in public opinion on the Oland case can be broken down into three camps. Those who think Dennis Oland is innocent, those who think he is guilty, and those who think he is guilty, but agree with Justice Morrison that the evidence is not solid enough to warrant a conviction. This is one of those cases where there's no envy to be had for anyone who winds up in the jury box. Although the concept of reasonable doubt is very easy to understand, if one were looking at a person they believed to be very likely guilty of committing a terrible crime, it's easy to imagine them feeling a deep anguish over the prospect of being responsible for letting that person walk free. And in such a circumstance, it's also easy to imagine that many jurors, as Oland's defense team contends, might secretly opt to ignore the reasonable doubt standard and cast their vote on the basis of good enough is good enough. It is this video's opinion that that is not what happened in this case. So today, we're going to switch things up a bit, jump off the fence, and explain why we think the jury got it right and Justice Morrison got it wrong.
Oh shit!
First, let's re-establish some very basic facts. Dennis Oland entered Richard Oland's office around 5:30 p.m. He departed for the final time at about 6:36. The guilt scenario involves him committing the murder sometime in that window, to state the obvious. The innocent scenario involves someone else committing the murder sometime after 6:36 p.m, again to state the obvious. The lack of plausible alternate suspects is a real thorn in the defence's side with this case. Some have floated candidates like Richard's mistress, the mistress's husband, or a yet-to-be-identified disgruntled business associate, and long story short, there's just no compelling evidence for any of these people or archetypes carrying out the crime. We won't bother breaking down a case against anyone specific, just for the sake of argument. Grant that there is definitely another person who would have a good motive to carry out the murder, and they haven't been cleared. The first broad scenario is that this person walks into Richard Oland's office very shortly after Dennis Oland leaves and commits the crime. This person's movements would have to have never come to the attention of authorities who combed through security tapes of the area that were filmed in and around the time of Dennis Oland coming and going. It would also destroy an entire plank of Dennis's defense narrative, the claim that the murder was heard from the print shop after 7:30. So naturally, the defense never pursued the possibility that Richard Oland's murder may have happened very shortly after Dennis's departure. They have always maintained it happened a fair bit later in the evening. Based on Ainsworth's early account of between 7:30 and 8:11, and Shaw's consistent account of between 7:30 and 7:45, the defense timeline has always put the murder at 7:30 or later. But just to be very generous, let's put forward a hypothetical scenario where the murder takes place a little bit earlier, at 7:20 p.m. as late as we can to keep Dennis's presence at Cochrane's County Market an ironclad alibi, and as early as we can to minimise how damning this next piece of information is. It was determined that on July 6th, all monitorable activity on Richard Oland's computer ceased at 5:39 p.m, about the time Dennis came in to work on the genealogy project with him. No clicks or keystrokes were documented after that time.
Oh shit!
Dennis Oland's defense countered that Richard's computer activity normally ceased around that time, which is true, but that's because it's normally about the time Richard Oland went home. Obviously, Richard Oland did not go home on the 6th. So if he was murdered in his office later in the evening, the inference should be that he decided to work a while later for that period of time. If Dennis left the office at 6:35 p.m. and Richard's murder occurred at 7:20 p.m, that's 45 minutes that Richard would need to be in his office but not touching his computer. In fairness, the genealogy documents Dennis had just brought in were all hard copy, so that's something that could have occupied his attention. But still, 45 minutes and not even one click or keystroke? And just as the earlier you place the murder, the weaker Dennis's alibi becomes.
I find no touching the computer plausible because he's an older man. I find it plausible not going along with Matt Orchard on this one just yet.
The later you place it, the more problematic it becomes to explain the cell phone activity. The defense posits that Richard's iPhone pinged off the Rothsay Tower because the killer was likely in the area, probably driving through as they fled the crime scene. The phone pinged off the tower at 6:44 p.m, making the defense explanation impossible if you put the murder anywhere near that alibi sweet spot of 7:20. So to put it all together, the Dennis Oland is innocent scenario unfolds like this. At about 5:35 p.m, Dennis enters his father's office wearing a jacket that unfortunately got Richard's blood innocuously transferred to it, either during the meeting or at an earlier date. Dennis departs Richard's office for the final time after making a return trip for a logbook at about 6:35 p.m. Richard Oland stays in his office without using his computer for another 10ish minutes, at which point his mistress sends him a text which is transmitted to his phone by a tower that would barely ever be responsible for sending a text to that part of town. This oddity occurs right around the time Dennis would be arriving at Renforth Wharf, where the tower would typically transmit text to. Richard Oland remains in his office for another 35 minutes, during which he does not respond to the text or use his computer, and then a person who is not Dennis Oland enters the office, bludgeons him to death, takes his phone, and walks off into the night, leaving not a trace of themselves behind that will ever be picked up on by investigators on account of the fact that they will get tunnel vision trying to pin the murder on Richard Oland's son, and grow only more dogged in their pursuit as virtually every piece of circumstantial evidence that comes to light winds up aligning with their totally incorrect theory. This scenario is possible, but this video contends that seriously entertaining it is not reasonable. So how did Dennis Oland, probably, as in almost certainly, get away with murder? Answer 1 would be dumb luck. We will hand it to the defense that carrying out that brutal of a slaying while not leaving anything incriminating behind, or getting more than a little spatter on you, is a low-odds proposition. We just believe the rest of the evidence should reasonably lead to the conclusion that Dennis Oland was in fact the beneficiary of just such a low-odds event. There was also a washroom outside Richard's office, which would have allowed the killer to easily clean blood off their hands and face before leaving. But police used that washroom for 2 days before doing any forensic testing of the area, meaning if there was any smoking gun in the drains, it was washed away. So a bit of luck in the form of beating the odds coupled with some investigative bungling and flawed witness testimony made what should have been an open and shut case look a little bit grayer. From there, the next answer as to how Dennis Oland wound up walking free is money. There's a common sentiment that the justice system treats the rich differently, though we would argue that's a touch too cynical. After all, Oland was convicted the first time. Money can't literally buy a not guilty verdict, but it can buy first-rate lawyers with the skill and resources to pick apart just about any evidence offered by the state, and make the smallest of potentially exculpatory evidence look like it carries a lot more weight than it really does. And if after all of that you still get found guilty, Money allows you to just keep going. Throwing shit at a wall to see what sticks in the form of appeal after appeal is something that just about anyone is allowed to do, but it's very expensive. And lastly, Dennis Oland may have benefited from simply being Dennis Oland. Not in the sense that he was a member of a powerful and wealthy family, but that his consistently modest, borderline meek demeanour might be enough to subconsciously push a jurist such as Justice Morrison over the edge of deciding reasonable doubt is really present, whereas otherwise they wouldn't have missed the forest for the trees. And it is certainly true that Dennis Oland does not look or sound like a man that is easy to picture carrying out a brutal bludgeoning. He also doesn't look or sound like a man that is easy to picture binding his wife's hands and feet and dragging her down a dirt path before picking her up and slamming her down headfirst into rocks. Actions alleged by Lisa Andrick Oland in a 2020 restraining order against her husband. So it's always worth remembering in cases like these. Sometimes.
Yo, burying the lead. Yeah, a man like, yeah, if you were upfront with that, I'd be like, yeah, that man guilty as fuck. Guilty as fuck. Damn, Matt Orchard. Literally last minute reveal. We got less than a minute left of this. He drops that goddamn bomb. Holy shit, what a YouTuber. What a goddamn legend.
Appearances can be deceiving.
What a goddamn
Need help
legend,
covering
man.
your tracks? Then your next stop.
Holy shit. What a way to end a video. Great googly moogly.